Photographic Composition, Lecture 12, Portfolio, Part 2. I wanted to show you a number of bodies of work by a variety of photographers. They each have their own way of presenting their work. In some cases, a very specific way of making the presentations comes through, and in others, they seem to be a little more random in their selection. Random is probably not the right word, because I'm sure they, as artists, they all have invested time and thought in how to arrange their work. It's just that the organization doesn't necessarily come across as strongly in some as in others. This is the website of Amy Vitali, who is a photojournalist, specifically a conflict photographer who has been to a number of war zones over a number of years. And she photographs not only the war itself, but also the devastation of the people who live in these war zones, and also how they get through their daily lives. There are a lot of kids in the pictures, and showing them in various states. In some instances, we see that they're wearing prostheses, and there is always in these images a reference to war of one kind or another. And they're very much about how people, regardless of where they are and who they are, find ways to rise above their circumstances. And in some cases, it's, the images are clearly about the irony of, in this case, attending some social event, and if you're a male between the ages of 15 and 55, you're going to be carrying an automatic weapon of some sort. A pair of women and their children, women in burqas. And a couple of women visiting someone in hospital. And a number of kids playing in rubble. And then for something completely different, Bill Cash is a very well-regarded commercial automotive photographer. He shoots almost exclusively cars, or certainly a great many. And yet he finds ways of introducing other imagery into his presentations. This is pretty typical of his work, and what you'll see of it. It tends to go through certain trends. One of the things that he employs, or has been employing recently, are sun flares and other spots and things like that on the lens that are more than likely created in Photoshop, which is a fairly easy thing to do. You see a bit more of that kind of effect with very otherwise pristine car, and then you get this kind of gritty element in it. And seemingly inexplicably, in the middle of it, we have a photograph of two biplanes and a wing walker in one of them. Part of this, I think, probably has to do with Cash's interest in expanding how he presents his work and exposing his clients and potential clients and people that he would like to work with to other things that he's interested in and other ways of handling subject matter. And from there we go to a sort of mid-20th century version of the Indy car in the same color as the biplane. So working with these two images off of each other. And from there we go into a photograph of a recent model car. And very often we'll see them screaming around corners with their wheels turned into the turn and smoke coming out from the tires. They're very often backlit, so we see rays of light from the sun overhead. And in this instance, it looks more like the sun has gone down, and we're traveling by the Griffith Park Observatory in LA. The likelihood that the car and the landscape were actually together at the same time is not at all likely. And again, inserting into the series, here's a seascape. And then a landscape, which actually does feature a car, but all we can really see of it is this, it's a relatively small object in the lower left-hand corner with dust being kicked up behind it as it passes through what I presume are the Sierras. And one of the things that car makers like to entice their potential customers with is the notion that if you have the right kind of vehicle, you can go out into the desert and go dune jumping or whatever they call it. It sounds terribly hokey on my part, but just to give you an idea, this is obviously a theme. Joe Feldman is a product photographer, and as with Bill Cash, he will at times include images that don't necessarily relate to a product that he's photographing, but he has included them as part of his presentation for the reasons of, if nothing else, gaining attention and maybe making a statement that goes beyond whatever the products convey. And this might be a little risky from the standpoint of somebody who's interested in working for manufacturers, but he's clearly got a sense of humor and willing to take some risks in that area. And typical of this kind of work, attention to detail is extraordinary. And more of his work is seen along these lines. Here he's using a diptych to present what he's to present these particular products. And here associating one object with another, only one of them being the product more than likely. And another where the product is seen fairly clearly, although it's a highly stylized image, and on the left, and then a much more stylized image on the right, where it's almost impossible to tell exactly what the objects look like. And then two, again, kind of divergent products. Well, actually, only the one on the left seems to include a product, which I assume is the lamp. And then on the right, a cactus with what appear to be a couple of melting ice cubes stuck on its spines. And a very typical product display of several elements. Almost black and white, with the exception of the lining of the clamshell case on the right. And this would appear to be an image of old technology, new technology, a tube amp with kind of retro-looking headphones. And the lighting here is, it's always important with these images, but it draws attention to itself by being heavily side lit. We can see the product actually quite clearly, but the light overall doesn't necessarily draw attention to it. And these are some groups of objects that the photographer has put together. It looks like there are also a number of layers involved to make the images look like they've been taken with old processes, and then combine the three of them to make a triptych. And it's perhaps an ad for golf equipment, but I honestly couldn't tell you that that's the case. Again, the idea is to be expansive in the process.